Welcome back. This is Paul DeBruzzo again. This video covers step 3 of the investment property analyzer tool. And in this video, we're covering how to calculate operating expenses in the spreadsheet. So just below the above effective gross income section and unit description section, there is the operating expenses. And if you think this is not important or you can skip over this or get through this briefly, it's not. Super important. It's not how much you make, it's how much you keep that really matters. So there are usually a lot of efficiencies and a lot of ways to reduce expenses in properties that are usually go unforeseen. So it's a great way to find efficiencies and ways to increase value when you're analyzing properties and especially new properties that are on the marketplace. So let's start here. So there's a very basic list of usual operating expenses that come with any property. Okay, and the number one is property tax. Now that's very easy to calculate. It usually comes right off the listing, and if you don't have a listing for the property, it's very easily found by your representative in other places. Okay, the rest of these expenses, are could be very different for each and every property. Okay, so we have insurance, heat, hydro, water, maintenance, management, asset management if you're using that, landscaping, any superintendent fees, garbage or recycling, and a expense line for reserve. So again, taxes are simply input from whatever the listing says or whatever your advisor finds for you online. And your insurance is something usually the seller will provide, along with the income. They will provide a list of expenses that from the previous year. So they may give you an insurance amount. Now, if they don't give you an insurance amount, you can quickly call your insurance broker to get an idea of what's going on, or refer to your investment advisor, your real estate salesperson, and they should have a good idea about how much a building should be insured for. Okay, so in this case, these are the seller's numbers, which is going to happen most often. So we've input 3,600 here. In heat, this particular building is heated by a gas boiler, a water boiler that pumps water through radiators throughout the building and provides radiant heat to the units. So this heat is really the gas bill for the entire building. Okay, and that's about $8,000 for the year. Hydro, the hydro is $1,100, and the reason why that's so low is because each of these units pays their own hydro. So the building is separately metered, and when the landlord places a new tenant in the building, they are paying rent plus the cost of hydro. Now, that's not always the case. In this case, the building is separately metered, and the tenants do pay hydro. There are lots of buildings out there where the tenants pay an all-inclusive rent. So the rents might be a little bit higher, and you would see a higher hydro cost here because the landlord is paying all the hydro. So this is the water bill for the entire building. So all what we call potable water, so water to the washrooms, sinks, showers, toilets, anywhere where they're usually using water for themselves. And maintenance. So maintenance is usually the seller will give you these expenses right here: taxes, insurance, heat, hydro, water. Okay. A lot of times they leave maintenance and management out. Okay. An industry average for maintenance is anywhere between 5 to 7% of this gross rental income number. Okay, so 5 to 7% of your effective gross rent can be allocated to what we call maintenance. Now, maintenance covers items like small random repairs, a little leak here and there, a broken door, a hole in the wall, a plumbing repair, electrical repair. When tenants leave, the turning over of the unit, so cleaning carpets or making small repairs to make the unit livable again for the next tenant, that's all covered under maintenance. Okay, this maintenance line does not cover large capital expenses like roof replacements or boiler replacements. There's a separate section for that. Okay, so the industry average is about 5 to 7%. In this case, we actually received a number from the seller at about 7,800, and that's just over the industry average, and that's fine. So obviously he in the last year he had a little bit more maintenance than he had in the last few years, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as we know what it is. Okay, and in this case, management is about the same. Management can run you anywhere between 5 and 8% as an industry average, again, of your gross rent. So I have it here at about 6.5, 6.4%. You could easily pay a little bit less or a little bit more depending on what kind of services the property manager is providing you. Okay, property management is very flexible. He can do some things or all things. You can make deals to, let's say, cover all the property, but you're going to do the tenant vacancies. You're going to fill all the units when they become vacant. So I won't spend too much time there, but just know that property management is a flexible agreement that you can work out with your property manager. Okay, so these are the basic expenses for the building. So that adds up to a total of $40,000, $40,323, and about 40% of effective gross income. So what's left is net operating income, or a very, very famous NOI. So that means if you had no mortgage on the property, basically you'd be earning about $101,000 a year, and it would cost you just over $40,000 a year to run the building, and you're left with $61,073 in net operating income. Okay. To calculate what we call cap rate, and I'm jumping a little ahead of myself, but I want to reinforce this. This NOI number becomes really important. But what we do is we take this NOI number and we do NOI divided by the purchase price, okay, and that equals cap rate. So we'll get into that calculation a little bit more as we get into the return section, but I wanted to give you that frame of reference now so you keep it in the back of your mind. So to review, we calculated our effective gross income, and we calculated all our basic expenses, okay? Taxes, insurance, heat, hydro, water, maintenance, and management. We totaled up that expenses up to $40,000. We subtracted the $40,000 from their effective gross rent, and we arrived at $61,073 in NOI, or net operating income. Okay, and this number is important because we need to know how to calculate the cap rate, and we need to know what the building would look like, assuming we had no financing at all. So a quick note, there is no expense line here for items such as capital expenses. And my philosophy is I don't put them in the operating expense of the property because it's not really an operating expense. Yes, you do have to spend money on things like replacing boilers or replacing a roof or redoing or updating electrical, for example, or plumbing too. But if you input them into the operating statement of a property, it really distorts what the actual operating operating numbers are. Because they're capital expenses, and when you're spending the money, you're making improvements to the building, it isn't really an expense. If you're going into a new purchase, and for example, there's knob and tube wiring, and it's going to cost you $10,000 to remove all the knob and tube and upgrade the wiring, it's definitely an expense and money coming out of your pocket, but it doesn't belong in an operating expense. It belongs in what's called capital cost. Okay, it's improving the building, and if I were you, I would allocate that money to your down payment. If it's going to cost you $100,000 to buy the building, I would say, you know what, this building is going to cost me $100,000 plus another 10 in capital costs, and it will improve the building and make it more valuable by this much. It's a much easier, much more sophisticated way to do that, and will help keep your operating statement much cleaner. So that's the end of step 3. The next one we'll look at financing. Thanks very much. Talk to you soon.